The gunshot echoed across the quiet suburban morning like thunder. Sarah Martinez watched in horror as her beloved donkey, Pedro, collapsed in his paddock, blood pooling beneath his gentle brown eyes. The HOA president stood 30 feet away, smoking rifle in hand, a satisfied smirk on her face. "Problem solved," Karen Whitfield called out coldly. What she didn't know was that Sarah wasn't just another homeowner. She was an off-duty sheriff's deputy with a badge, a gun, and absolutely nothing left to lose. In 20 years of law enforcement, Sarah had never wanted to make an arrest more than she did right now. The morning had started like any other. Saturday, in Willowbrook Estates, Sarah Martinez stepped onto her back porch with a steaming cup of coffee, breathing in the crisp October air. At 38, she'd been a sheriff's deputy for nearly 2 decades, and these quiet moments before the world woke up were sacred to her. The stress of her job domestic violence calls, drug busts, and the endless paperwork seemed to melt away when she watched Pedro, grazing peacefully in his small paddock. Pedro wasn't just any donkey. The gentle miniature donkey had been a rescue, saved from a neglectful owner 3 years ago. He'd become Sarah's therapy after the shooting that had nearly ended her career. The department psychologist had recommended a pet, but Sarah had gone one better. Pedro's calm presence had helped her through the nightmares, the anxiety attacks, and the slow climb back to active duty. "Morning, buddy," she called softly. Pedro's ears perked up, and he trotted over to the fence, nudging her hand with his velvet nose. She scratched behind his ears exactly the way he liked it. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" The tranquil moment shattered like glass. "What the hell is that thing doing in my neighborhood?" Sarah turned to see Karen Whitfield striding across the lawn, her perfectly styled blonde hair bouncing with each aggressive step. As president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, Karen ruled the subdivision with an iron fist wrapped in passive-aggressive pleasantries. Today, however, there was nothing pleasant about her expression. "Good morning, Karen," Sarah said evenly, her cop instincts automatically reading the situation. Karen's face was flushed, her hands clenched into fists. Whatever had set her off, it was serious. "Don't good morning me," Karen snapped, pointing an accusatory finger at Pedro. "That animal is a direct violation of our HOA covenant. Section 12.3 clearly states that no livestock shall be kept on residential properties." Sarah set down her coffee cup, her jaw tightening. They'd been through this before. Pedro isn't livestock. Karen, he's a registered therapy animal. "I have all the documentation. I don't care what kind of fake papers you've cooked up," Karen interrupted, her voice rising to a shriek that made Pedro's ears flatten against his head. "This is a respectable neighborhood, not some backwoods farm. That creature is lowering everyone's property values, and I won't stand for it." "Lower your voice," Sarah said quietly, but there was steel in her tone. "You're scaring him." Karen's laugh was harsh and bitter. "Oh, I'm just getting started. I've been documenting every violation, every complaint from the neighbors. Did you know the Hendersons can't even open their windows because of the smell? The Johnsons' daughter is allergic to animal dander and breaks out in hives every time she plays in their backyard." "That's not how allergies work, and you know it," Sarah replied, but Karen steamrolled over her objection. "I've filed a formal complaint with the county. I've contacted animal control. I've even spoken to your supervisor at the sheriff's department." Karen's smile was venomous. "That's right, Deputy Martinez. I know exactly who you are, and I know that cops are supposed to follow the law, not break it." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You called my supervisor?" Sheriff Williams was very interested to hear that one of his deputies was flagrantly violating local ordinances. He assured me that the matter would be handled swiftly and appropriately. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her career had already been hanging by a thread after the shooting incident. An officer-involved shooting was always scrutinized, even when it was justified, even when the suspect had been armed and dangerous. Even when Sarah had followed protocol to the letter, the department had cleared her, but there were always whispers, always doubts. Another black mark on her record could be the end of everything she'd worked for. "Karen, please," Sarah said, hating the pleading note in her voice. "Pedro isn't hurting anyone. He's quiet, he's clean, and he's helping me, helping you, what? Get over shooting that poor kid." The air left Sarah's lungs in a rush. The poor kid had been 19-year-old Marcus Thompson, high on PCP and wielding a machete outside an elementary school. He'd already injured 2 civilians and was advancing on a group of terrified children when Sarah had been forced to fire. The shooting had been ruled justified, but Marcus had died, and his family had painted him as a misunderstood teenager rather than the violent criminal he'd become. "You have no right," Sarah began, but Karen cut her off again. "I have every right. This is my neighborhood, and I protect it from people like you." Sarah's training kicked in. The de-escalation techniques she'd learned in academy and refined over years of dealing with hostile suspects. She took a deep breath, forcing her voice to remain calm. "Let's discuss this rationally. What would it take for you to withdraw your complaints?" Karen's eyes gleamed with triumph. "Get rid of the donkey. Today, I want it gone by sundown, or I'm calling animal control myself. I can't do that. Pedro is registered as my therapy animal. I have legal documents. Fake documents don't impress me. I've done my research. Deputy Martinez, miniature donkeys aren't recognized as therapy animals under federal law. Your little fraud won't hold up under scrutiny." Sarah's hands trembled with suppressed rage. Karen was wrong about the law, but she was right about one thing: the legal battle would be expensive and time-consuming, and with her career already in jeopardy, Sarah couldn't afford the distraction. "I need time to make arrangements," Sarah said finally. "Finding a proper home for Pedro isn't something I can do in one day. You've had 3 years to find somewhere else to keep your pet. I'm done being patient." "1 week," Sarah countered. "Give me 1 week to find him a good home." Karen pretended to consider it, tapping her manicured nails against her designer purse. 3 days. That's more than generous. 5 days. That's my final offer." "Fine. 5 days." Karen's smile was cold as winter. "But if that animal is still here next Friday, I'm calling animal control the county inspector and every news station in the tri-state area. We'll see how Sheriff Williams feels about his deputy becoming a public embarrassment." With that, Karen turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, her mission accomplished. Sarah watched her go, fury and desperation warring in her chest. Pedro nuzzled her hand again, sensing her distress. "It's okay, boy," she whispered, but the words felt like lies. Nothing was okay. Nothing had been okay since the shooting, and now it was all falling apart. The next 3 days passed in a blur of phone calls and desperate searches. Sarah contacted every animal rescue within 100 miles, but miniature donkeys weren't easy to place. The few sanctuaries that had space wanted hefty adoption fees she couldn't afford on a deputy's salary. Private buyers were scarce, and Sarah refused to sell Pedro to just anyone. She'd seen too many animal cruelty cases to risk placing him with someone who might neglect or abuse him. By Thursday evening, Sarah was out of options. She sat in Pedro's paddock, her back against the fence post, watching him graze in the fading light. The October air was getting colder, and she'd need to bring out his winter blanket soon, if he was still here to need it. "I'm sorry, buddy," she whispered. "I'm failing you, just like I fail everyone else." Pedro wandered over and lowered his head, resting his chin on her shoulder. It was a gesture of pure trust and affection, and it broke Sarah's heart completely. She buried her face in his coarse mane and wept for her partner who'd been killed in the line of duty 5 years ago. For Marcus Thompson, whose life had ended in violence, for her own shattered confidence, and now for the gentle creature helped her heal. Friday morning arrived, gray and drizzling, matching Sarah's mood perfectly. She'd taken a personal day, unable to face her colleagues while her world crumbled. She was feeding Pedro his breakfast when Karen's voice cut through. "The morning gloom, time's up, Deputy Martinez." Sarah turned to see Karen approaching, but she wasn't alone. 3 other neighbors walked behind Hertha Henderson's, Mrs. Johnson, and Tom Bradley from the end of the street. They looked uncomfortable, shooting nervous glances at each other and avoiding Sarah's eyes. "It's not noon yet," Sarah said, checking her watch. "You said I had until the end of the day." I said, 5 days, and 5 days are up. The clock doesn't stop just because you're feeling sorry for yourself. Karen, please, I just need a few more hours. I have a lead on a sanctuary upstate. No more excuses. Tom, call animal control." Tom Bradley, a mild-mannered accountant who'd never shown any animosity toward Pedro, pulled out his phone with obvious reluctance. Karen, maybe we should give her until call them now. The authority in Karen's voice was unmistakable, and Tom's fingers moved to dial. Sarah felt panic. Rising eye. The Miranda rights rolled off Sarah's tongue with mechanical precision, muscle memory taking over as her conscious mind reeled from the horror of what had just happened. Karen's satisfied smirk never wavered, even as Sarah's Glock 19 remained. Trained on her center mass, you have the right to an attorney. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. Do you understand these rights as I have read them to you? Oh, please, Karen scoffed, still holding the smoking rifle. You think you can intimidate me with that dramatic cop routine? I know my rights, and I know you won't shoot me. You're already hanging by a thread after your last trigger-happy incident. Sarah's finger tightened on the trigger, and for a heartbeat, the world balanced on a knife's edge. 20 years of training, warred with 20 seconds of pure, incandescent rage. Pedro's blood was still spreading across the grass, his kind eyes staring sightlessly at the gray October sky. Drop the weapon, Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Now, make me, Karen challenged, raising the rifle slightly. We both know you don't have the guts to. Tom Bradley's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Jesus Christ, Karen, put the gun down. Are you insane? The other neighbors had stopped their retreat, drawn back by the sound of the gunshot. Mrs. Henderson was sobbing openly, her hands pressed to her mouth. The Johnsons stood frozen in their driveway, their teenage daughter recording everything on her phone. Tom looked like he was about to vomit. She shot Pedro. Mrs. Henderson wailed. She actually shot him. The animal was a nuisance, Karen said, dismissively, but Sarah caught the slight tremor in her voice. The reality of what she'd done was starting to penetrate her righteous fury. I was protecting our property values by committing murder. Sarah's voice cracked on the last word. Pedro wasn't human, but he'd been more than an animal to her. He'd been a friend, a companion, a lifeline when she'd been drowning in darkness. It's not murder if it's just an animal, Karen replied, but her bravado was slipping. She glanced around nervously, taking in the horrified faces of her neighbors. You all agreed with me. You all wanted it gone. Not like this, Tom said, his face pale. Jesus, Karen, not like this. I never wanted violence, Mrs. Henderson sobbed. I just signed your petition because you kept pestering me. I liked the little donkey. He was sweet. The crowd was turning against her, and Karen's grip on the rifle tightened. Sarah recognized the signs, the cornered animal desperation, the wild look in her eyes. Karen was realizing that she'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross, and panic was setting in. Everyone stay calm, Sarah said, raising her voice to address the growing crowd. More neighbors had emerged from their houses, drawn by the commotion. I need everyone to step back and give us some space. You can't arrest me, Karen said, her voice rising to a near shriek. I'm the HOA president. I was enforcing community standards. You discharged a firearm in a residential area, Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off Karen. You killed an animal without cause. You threatened a law enforcement officer. Those are crimes, Karen. Real crimes with real consequences. Consequences? Karen laughed hysterically. I want to talk about consequences? I've dedicated my life to this community. I've spent countless hours making sure property values stay high, keeping out the riffraff, maintaining standards. And you're going to arrest me for solving one problem. You murdered my friend, Sarah said quietly, and the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Something shifted in Karen's expression. The self-righteous anger gave way to something darker, more desperate. Your farm, it was a farm animal. A smelly, noisy, property value destroying pest. He was registered as a therapy animal. He was helping me recover from PTSD after a line-of-duty shooting. And you killed him because he didn't fit your idea of suburban perfection, the crowd murmured. Angrily at this revelation, Sarah had never discussed her therapy animal publicly, preferring to keep her mental health struggles private. But Pedro's death had stripped away her defenses, leaving her raw and exposed. PTSD. You mean, you're weak. You couldn't handle doing your job, so you got a pet to make yourself feel better. Well, maybe this will toughen you up. The callous words hit Sarah like physical blows. Every doubt she'd had about her fitness for duty, every nightmare about Marcus Thompson, every moment of self-loathing came rushing back. But this time, instead of breaking her, the pain crystallized into something harder and more focused. "Karen Whitfield," Sarah said, her voice carrying the full authority of her badge, "you are under arrest. Drop the weapon and place your hands behind your head." "I'm not going anywhere with you," Karen snarled. "You're a broken cop who can't even protect her own pet. What makes you think you can arrest me?" She raised the rifle toward Sarah, and the world exploded into motion. Sarah's training took over completely. She'd been in gunfights before, had faced down armed suspects who wanted her dead, but this was different. This wasn't some addict or hardened criminal. This was a suburban mom who thought her HOA presidency made her untouchable. "Gun!" Sarah shouted, alerting the civilians to take cover. Most of the neighbors scattered, but a few were too frozen with shock to move. Tom Bradley stood directly in the potential line of fire, his face a mask of disbelief. "Karen, don't do this," he pleaded. "Think about your family. Think about your kids, my kids." Karen's laugh was unhinged. "My kids go to private school in the next county because I refuse to let them attend classes with the trash that's been moving into this neighborhood. Everything I do is for them." She swung the rifle toward Tom, whether intentionally or not, Sarah couldn't tell. But the muzzle was now pointing at an innocent civilian, and Sarah's decision-making matrix simplified to binary code. Shoot or don't shoot. She chose to shoot. The Glock bucked in her hands, the familiar recoil barely registering in her muscle memory. Her shot took Karen high in the right shoulder, spinning her around and sending the rifle flying. Karen screamed and fell to her knees, clutching the wound as blood seeped through her designer blouse. Officer down, Sarah barked into her radio, then immediately corrected herself. Suspect down. Officer involved shooting at 1247 Maple Lane. Need immediate medical and backup. The next few minutes were a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Paramedics arrived first, followed closely by patrol units from Sarah's own department. Karen was loaded onto a stretcher, still conscious, and screaming about lawsuits and police brutality. The rifle was secured as evidence, and the crime scene was cordoned off with yellow tape. Sheriff Williams arrived as Karen's ambulance pulled away. He was a tall, weathered man in his 50s who had been Sarah's mentor since she'd joined the department. His expression was unreadable as he approached her. "Sarah," he said quietly, "tell me what happened." Sarah gave him the facts in clipped, professional sentences. The HOA dispute, the illegal discharge of a firearm, the threat to civilians, the decision to use deadly force to protect Tom Bradley. She didn't mention Pedro's role as her therapy animal or the emotional devastation of watching him die. Those details would come later in the formal investigation. "You did the right thing," Sheriff Williams said when she finished. "Karen Whitfield just committed multiple felonies in front of 24 witnesses. The shooting was justified." "Sir," Sarah began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I know what you're thinking. This is your second officer-involved shooting in 5 years. The press will have a field day. The department will face scrutiny. But Sarah, listen to me. You saved lives today. If you hadn't acted, Karen might have shot Tom Bradley or one of the other neighbors, or even you." Sarah nodded numbly, but the sheriff's words felt hollow. She'd done her job, followed her training, made the right tactical decision. But Pedro was still dead, and no amount of professional validation could bring him back. "There's something else," Sheriff Williams said, his tone shifting. "I got a call from Karen Whitfield 3 days ago. She claimed you were violating county ordinances by keeping livestock on residential property." Sarah's heart sank. "Sir, I can explain. No need. I looked into it myself. Pedro was properly registered as a therapy animal. Your paperwork was completely in order. I was planning to call you Monday to let you know the complaint was bogus." The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. If Karen had just waited 3 more days, she would have learned that her complaint was groundless. Pedro would still be alive, and none of this would have happened. "She killed him for nothing," Sarah whispered. "She killed him because she's a narcissistic control freak who couldn't stand being told no." Sheriff Williams corrected. "This isn't on you, Sarah. This is on her." Detective Ray Morales arrived as they were speaking. He was Sarah's sometime partner and longtime friend, a seasoned investigator who'd worked dozens of officer-involved shootings. His presence was both comforting and ominous. It meant the investigation would be thorough and fair. But it also meant Sarah's actions would be scrutinized down to the second. "Hey, partner," Ray said gently. "Rough day." Sarah let out a bitter laugh. "That's one way to put it." "Walk me through it," Ray said, pulling out his notebook. "And don't leave anything out. I need to hear it all." So Sarah told the story again, this time including the emotional context, Pedro's role in. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood in the hallway outside courtroom 3B of the County Superior Court. Adjusting her dress uniform for the third time, the brass buttons gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and her service ribbons were perfectly aligned. She'd worn this uniform to funerals, award ceremonies, and promotional hearings, but never to testify in a case where she was both the arresting officer and the victim. "You ready for this?" Detective Ray Morales asked, straightening his own tie. He'd been her shadow throughout the investigation, and today he would testify about the evidence collected at the scene. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, though her stomach churned with nervous energy. The shooting investigation had cleared her completely. The body camera footage, witness statements, and physical evidence all supported her account. But Karen Whitfield's trial was different. This was about justice for Pedro, and Sarah wasn't sure the legal system was equipped to deliver it. District Attorney Monica Chen emerged from the courtroom, her expression grim. The defense just filed another motion to dismiss the animal cruelty charges. They're arguing that Pedro was classified as livestock under county ordinances, making Karen's actions legal. "That's ridiculous," Sarah said. "Pedro was registered as a therapy animal. I have all the documentation." "I know, and the judge knows it too, but Karen's lawyer is throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks." David Kellerman is one of the best defense attorneys in the state. He's expensive, but he's good. Sarah had researched Kellerman after learning he'd been retained by Karen's family. He specialized in defending wealthy clients who found themselves in legal trouble, often by attacking the credibility of law enforcement officers. His strategy was already becoming clear paint Sarah as an unstable cop with a history of excessive force, and portray Karen as a concerned homeowner who'd been driven to desperate measures. "Just stick to the facts," Chen advised. "Tell the truth and let the evidence speak for itself." The courtroom was packed when they entered. Karen sat at the defense table in a conservative navy suit, her shoulder still bandaged beneath the fabric. She'd hired an image consultant along with her lawyer, and the transformation was remarkable. Gone was the imperious HOA president who'd terrorized the neighborhood for years. In her place sat a seemingly fragile woman who looked like she'd never hurt a fly. Sarah took her seat in the gallery, scanning the crowd. Most of her neighbors were there: Tom Bradley, the Hendersons, Mrs. Johnson, and dozens of others. They'd all been subpoenaed as witnesses, and their presence gave Sarah some comfort. Whatever happened today, the truth would be told. The prosecution's opening statement was straightforward. DA Chen methodically outlined the charges: animal cruelty, illegal discharge of a firearm within city limits, reckless endangerment, and assault on a police officer. She painted a picture of escalating harassment that culminated in the senseless murder of an innocent animal. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Chen said, her voice carrying across the silent courtroom, "this case is about a woman who believed her position as HOA president gave her the right to terrorize her neighbors. When Deputy Martinez refused to bow to her demands, Karen Whitfield took the law into her own hands. She grabbed a rifle and executed an innocent animal in cold blood, then threatened the life of a sworn law enforcement officer." Defense attorney Kellerman's opening was predictably different. He portrayed Karen as a dedicated community leader who'd been pushed to her breaking point by an unstable police officer's refusal to follow local ordinances. "My client isn't a monster," Kellerman said, gesturing toward Karen with theatrical sympathy. "She's a mother, a volunteer, a woman who dedicated her life to maintaining the quality of life in her neighborhood. Deputy Martinez's decision to keep an illegal farm animal in a residential area created a dangerous situation that could have been avoided if she'd simply followed the rules." Sarah gritted her teeth as Kellerman spoke. He was skilled at twisting facts, making Karen sound like a victim of circumstances rather than the aggressor she'd been. The prosecution's case began with Tom Bradley, who testified about Karen's increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to the shooting. His account was damning. Karen had become obsessed with removing Pedro from the neighborhood, making threats and filing false complaints. She said she'd do whatever it took to get rid of that donkey, Tom testified. I thought she meant more, paperwork, maybe another HOA meeting. I never imagined she'd actually ... Objection, Kellerman interjected. Speculation. Sustained. Judge Patricia Hawkins ruled, the witness will stick to what he observed directly. The parade of witnesses continued throughout the morning. Mrs. Henderson broke down crying as she described watching Pedro fall. The Johnsons' teenage daughter testified about filming the incident on her phone. Each account built a comprehensive picture of Karen's actions that day, but it was Dr. Patricia Vance's testimony that proved most crucial. The county coroner had performed a complete necropsy on Pedro, and her findings were devastating to the defense. The animal was shot from a distance of approximately 30 feet, Dr. Vance testified. The bullet entered the chest cavity, severed the major arteries around the heart. Death would have been nearly instantaneous. In your professional opinion, Da Chen asked, was this animal suffering or presenting any kind of threat when it was shot? Absolutely not. The animal was standing calmly in its paddock, showing no signs of distress or aggressive behavior. The trajectory of the bullet indicates it was shot while grazing peacefully. Kellerman's cross-examination was brutal. He questioned Dr. Vance's qualifications, suggested that Pedro might have been suffering from undiagnosed conditions, and even implied that the animal's death was somehow merciful. Sarah watched the jury's faces during this exchange, relieved to see several members looking disgusted by the defense's tactics. The afternoon session began with Sarah's testimony. She'd been dreading this moment for weeks, knowing that Kellerman would try to use her previous shooting against her. But as she walked to the witness stand, she felt a strange sense of calm. This was her chance to speak for Pedro, to tell his story to the world. Da Chen led her through the events of that October morning, starting with her peaceful breakfast on the porch and ending with Karen's arrest. Sarah's voice remained steady. As she described Pedro's role in her PTSD recovery, Karen's campaign of harassment, and the horrific moment when the rifle discharged. Deputy Martinez, Chen said, in your 20 years of law enforcement, have you ever encountered a situation like this? No, ma'am. I've seen plenty of domestic disputes, neighbor conflicts, even animal cruelty cases. But I've never seen someone commit such a calculated act of violence over something so trivial. Objection, Kellerman said. Characterization. Overruled, Judge Hawkins replied. The witness is giving her professional opinion based on her experience. When Kellerman rose for cross-examination, Sarah braced herself. She knew he'd try to rattle her, to make her look unstable or trigger-happy, but she'd been preparing for this moment since the day she'd decided to become a cop. Deputy Martinez Kellerman began, his tone deceptively friendly. You've been involved in 2 officer-involved shootings in the past 5 years, correct? Yes, sir. That's quite unusual, isn't it? Most police officers never fire their weapon in the line of duty. I work in a high-crime area, sir. Sometimes deadly force is necessary to protect innocent lives, including the life of Marcus Thompson, the 19-year-old you killed 3 years ago. Sarah felt the familiar stab of guilt at the mention of Marcus's name, but she kept her voice steady. Marcus Thompson was armed with a machete and threatening elementary school children. I used deadly force to prevent him from harming innocent people, but you were cleared of wrongdoing in that case only after an extensive investigation, weren't you? The investigation was routine for any officer-involved shooting. It found that my actions were justified and within department policy. Nevertheless, you were traumatized by the experience. Traumatized enough to require therapy, animal, isn't that right? Sarah saw where this was heading, but she refused to be ashamed of seeking help. I was diagnosed with PTSD after the shooting. Pedro was part of my treatment, recommended by the department psychologist. And you became emotionally attached to this animal, didn't you? Pedro was my companion and therapy partner. Yes, I cared about him, cared enough to threaten my client when she tried to enforce legitimate HOA regulations. I never threatened Karen Whitfield. I asked her to leave my property when she was trespassing. But you drew your weapon on her, didn't you? I drew my weapon when she pointed a rifle at me and other civilians. That's called defense. Kellerman spent another hour trying to shake Sarah's testimony, but she held firm. She'd been cross-examined by defense attorneys dozens of times, and she knew how to handle hostile questioning. More importantly, She had the truth on her side. The prosecution rested its case that afternoon, and the defense began its presentation. The following morning, Kellerman's strategy was to paint Karen as a victim of circumstances, driven to desperate measures by an intransigent neighbor and unsympathetic authorities. Karen's own testimony was carefully choreographed. She spoke softly about her dedication to the community, her efforts to maintain PR,